Hello my friends, and welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this community, we spend an awful lot of time talking about the meta. What's the best gun, the best ammo, the best armor, the best loot run, whatever. We've spent countless hours arguing over what's the best. And recently, it kinda got me thinking about the opposite end of that spectrum. What's the worst? The gear in Tarkov that has been in the game for years, but is barely worth picking up to self-defense. Basically, what's the anti-meta? Weapons that for many reasons just don't get used and probably will never be used for the simple fact that they're outcompeted on every front by something else. And let me tell you, the more I thought about it, the more stuff came to mind. That's what I'll be going over in this one, so settle in for a trip into the dusty basement of Tarkov to unpack a few worthless weapon builds and talk about why they just aren't worth the rubles, as well as what could possibly be changed or added to make them worth using. First up in this video, we have a gun that I'm willing to bet almost nobody has ever taken into a raid unironically, the MP5K. This gun is essentially just an MP5 with the front and back chopped off to make something that a security guard could carry under their suit jacket, and you have to admit, that's a pretty cool idea. In a real world situation, there might be some pretty legit applications for this thing. But in Tarkov, you often might be better off just using it as a club to beat your enemies to death with, because pretty much anyone using any other weapon is probably going to beat you in that gunfight. But at least when you inevitably die with this weapon, you won't be feeling the hit on your bank account too much because it is seriously dirt cheap. You can't even put a suppressor on this thing, so most of the time you're just slapping a red dot sight on it and hoping for the best. One thing that I will say about the MP5K is that it is one of the only weapons in Tarkov that I feel can actually use the Hydra mount for its intended purpose of installing a laser onto something that simply doesn't have the rail space to mount one otherwise, which I will admit did kind of inspire me to run a few raids with this thing. Recoil-wise, it honestly isn't even that bad, but if we're being realistic, literally anything with a functioning stock is gonna just be easier to land shots with. It's just too bad we can't dual-wield MP5Ks and cosplay as Neo. So what could be done to make the MP5K into something that players might actually use? Well, the first answer is actually really simple. Add one of the several MP5K stocks that exist in the real world into the game. There's a ton of different options available just from a simple Google search from HK themselves as well as B&T and other manufacturers. I even saw somebody that made an adapter to put the ACR stock onto the MP5K. Another easy solution that I think everyone would agree on is to give us some of the suppressors available for the MP5K. Currently, you can't put any muzzle devices onto this thing, so you can't actually change the recoil stats of this thing at all. Would the MP5K suddenly be meta with these attachments? No, people don't even run the normal MP5 in Tarkov anymore. But it would at least make it usable, something that you might want to choose for a fun lightweight loadout for looting on reserve or just running factory. Alright, so next up for the Tarkov anti-meta gun list, we have another one that I'm willing to bet most people in Tarkov have never really used. The Stechkin APB suppressed machine pistol. The APB is such a cool little piece of kit, and it's frankly a shame that it just isn't really worth using in Tarkov as anything but an emergency sidearm for broke boy bolt action Vepr loadouts. This thing packs 20 rounds into a pistol mag, it comes with a wire buttstock, so in that way it even beats the MP5K in terms of being a functional SMG, and this version of the pistol even comes with a suppressor. While in real life it was originally designed for vehicle crews as a PDW, it apparently found its true calling among special forces units, and it's kind of easy to see why. At least for the time it was adopted in the 1970s, I doubt there was many other super compact, full auto suppressed firearms available, and this thing was probably considered pretty high speed 50 years ago. But when this pistol was designed, body armor was still somewhat of a foreign concept, and that I think is one of the main reasons why it just isn't worth using in Tarkov. Everyone uses body armor in Tarkov, and even the best possible armor-piercing round available in 9x18 can barely scratch most of the armor that players are going to choose. There's also the fact that the Keter B exists, which essentially does everything the APB does, but with a higher fire rate, better recoil, and bigger magazines. The APB does have sort of a niche use as a cheap suppressed full auto sidearm for dedicated bolt action players, but at the same time, I think almost anyone would rather take a suppressed 5.7 over this thing at roughly the same price. So what could make this sweet little pistol more usable? I honestly don't have an answer to that question. It'd be kind of awesome if Mechanic could maybe sell us a custom mount to put a sight and a laser on this thing, and maybe a dedicated AP round only usable by the APB and Makarov could make it more deadly as well. Some guns though just can't be fixed, and I think the APB is always going to fall into that category of being neat but functionally useless to PMCs in this game. And for spot number 3 on this list, I think we have the closest thing to an actual good weapon that you'll see in this category, the RPK-16. Now, unlike something like the MP5K or the APB, the RPK isn't honestly that bad. It's a full-sized 5.45 rifle. It can be modded out with a stock foregrip muzzle device and scope. It takes all 5.45 mags, and really, it's far from the worst weapon that you could pick to take into a raid. But that being said, it just could never really compete for that top spot in the 5.45 category. In almost every single patch since it was introduced as Killa's primary weapon, I've tried to compare it to the AK-74 and the 74U as either a meta contender or a budget option. And to this day, I still have never really found a situation where I would rather be running this over one of those. Sure, it's kinda cheap on the market, but so is the AK-74. And the AK-74 can be outfitted with a huge range of attachments that all add up to just make it better. Even with the best possible attachments on the RPK, in current Tarkov, the AKS-74U is easier to keep on target, and it's lighter with higher ergonomics. A full meta AK-74 just absolutely blows this thing out of the water, and it's not even close. Recently, we also got the AK-12 in Tarkov, which has very similar problems as the RPK, but it has a higher fire rate, so at least it has something that gives it an edge over other weapons. To add insult to injury, the RPK can't even use a bipod yet in Tarkov, despite the fact that it's classified as an LMG. The AK-74 even beats it as an LMG, just let that sink in. The RPK at home is better than the actual RPK. So the last weapon I want to talk about in this video is a truly forgotten weapon of Tarkov, to the point where I didn't even remember it existed until I looked at a list of Tarkov's weapons to come up with some ideas for this video. The STM-9 is a semi-auto carbine that fires 9x19 rounds, so right off the bat we're running into a problem. In real life, as a fun little target shooting gun, I'm sure this thing is pretty sweet. But in Tarkov, if you're stuck on semi-auto, you better be shooting a big bullet. The STM-9 is kind of a cool gun because it uses AR-15 attachments, which leads to some really interesting fashion builds. It also has like 4 different barrel lengths, so you can play around with everything from short little PDW type builds to full-length wannabe DMRs. I think the angled magazine and overall slim profile of the STM do give it some serious cool factor, but from the perspective of winning fights, I don't think it'll ever be a serious contender. With the best armor-piercing ammo available for 9mm, it still barely matches the mid-tier rounds of any rifle in the game, and you're going to have to be significantly closer to the target to actually make a good hit. As a 9mm gun, being stuck on semi-auto and Tarkov is kind of just crippling. It's likely going to be beaten at close range by full-auto SMGs that can outshoot it, and beaten at long range by precision rifles that can outrange it. Like the RPK, I think the STM isn't the worst choice for a raid into Tarkov, but you're kind of intentionally nerfing yourself when you choose it. So what do I think could be done to make the STM-9 worth using? It's incredibly simple. Give us a workbench craft to convert this thing to full auto, and you easily have something that could be an amazing SMG to play with. And that pretty much covers it for this one. I actually kind of enjoyed going through some of Tarkov's lesser used weapons. It was refreshing to look at some stuff that I've kind of ignored on the channel for years because they just weren't good enough for me to recommend to people to actually use. But with the meta in Tarkov being pretty much a solved equation at this point, I think it's kind of interesting to look at the rest of the arsenal for a while and give the spotlight to the underdogs. I hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you think down in the comments. Have you ever given these weapons a try? And what other guns could fit this category of things that will just never be meta? Thanks for checking out the video. I've got a link to my Twitch channel in the description if you want to come say hi. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City, everyone.